Hello, friends. My name's host Eric. I'm the host talking with famous people. I'm here with my beloved and special Wonder Pants named Rachel. As we were driving along here, I had a thought that I wanted to share with folks, which is, and I've thought it before, but I haven't really explicated it, is that really what almost every conflict in life comes down to, or every problem that the world comes down to, or every inadequacy in the world, is a incorrect parsing of the particular and the universal. So we could look at drugs as an example of how this plays out. So it is the case that as a general rule, lots of people have some kind of problem with drugs, right? So in other words, people go to Alcoholics Anonymous or drug treatment or whatever, not because some oppressive person is forcing them into these things. It's because they genuinely do have a problem with drugs, right? So it is the case that lots of people end up with drug and alcohol problems. But the problem is then we say we have a drug problem, or drugs are the problem, or something like that. And that's when we really universalize it into ways that are self-defeating, ultimately. If we try to say that drugs are a problem, or drug addiction is a problem, or something like that, then we're excusing both the individual and society from any meaningful responsibility at all. Alcohol was never the problem. It was my stubbornness about it that was the problem, right? That I always knew that on some level that I couldn't handle this stuff. I couldn't drink it, but I wanted to, and I was very stubborn about denying the reality that was in front of me and the truth that was in front of me. So can we universalize anything from there about your relationship with alcohol? No. About alcohol? No. We can say something about my nature, which is to be a stubborn deliberator who doesn't like to accept what he knows over what he decides. But most importantly, what we can see is that in that instance, it was me needing to be accountable. Now, in some other instances, when somebody's, regularly doing whatever substance is and has it integrated into their life, it's society that needs to be accountable. It's society that needs to say, okay, we've broadened norms here beyond where they meaningfully apply to any specific individual, and yet we act as though they consistently do. And so, in that regard, the process of externalizing what are fundamentally particular questions into universalities where there are no agents to hold accountable is a process that makes it impossible for us to meaningfully progress as a civilization and as a species. It's if we're talking about something like pharmaceuticals for mental health patients, it is the case that there are plenty of times that the mental health industry / medical industry does a terrible job of things. There's no disputing that. But when you get people who are so angry about that reality that they want to damn the entire field of psychiatry, for example, and say, like Scientologists do, right? And say that people don't really need mental health drugs. It's just a matter of society being responsible ultimately, or themselves being responsible. That they're responsible because they aren't thinking properly, or they're responsible because they've been pushed by society into a state of breaking down or something. Well, that's also trying to make either universal something that's not, mostly is what it's trying to do, but to a certain extent it's trying to say that I can make your particular experience.
Pharmacy. If you're dropping off a new prescription, please make sure the name, address, date of birth, and cell phone number are clearly written on.
Because
Can I have the patient's date of birth?
so, if I can keep my train of thought here, the point is that when you attempt to say my frame of reference is going to subsume your experience entirely, then you're trying to universalize something that is properly understood through a particular frame. So, for example, if in fact we've got very concrete examples of individuals who had mental health problems that were notable by others and obvious prior to taking these drugs, and then are perfectly fine after, and when you remove the drugs they go back to this way, and when you put them in they go back to this way, it's pretty indisputable that those drugs have done what they're supposed to be doing, right?
Which one was the other medication?
So it's like, if you're somebody who thinks this question of whether or not mental health ought to be medicated can be resolved on a universal level, in other words, that there's a single answer to that question about whether medication is good for mental illness and blah, 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 that because the psychiatry, psychology, whatever industry does a bunch of things wrong, that we can damn everything they do, well, then you're not adequately engaging in a particularist calculus, which is to say you have to judge various things on their merits, and only some kinds of labels cascade down as damning in that fashion. So that may work argumentationally, like none of the arguments you're making here comprise adequate reasons for us to believe something because they're predicated all on this false assumption. Would be a fine way to say that something cascades down. But in this instance, what people are trying to do is apply that kind of universality to something that doesn't apply to, namely too much of a particular matter. Each individual has their own reactions and so forth to not just drugs, but everything in life. So, and at the same time, we have to have some kind of standards that apply equally to everybody, regardless of who they are. But the thing is, historically, in the West anyway, that is broken down simply enough into this issue of trespass. Is what you're doing trespassing against others or not? But in the current world, we don't tend to discuss things on those. We don't tend to discuss those framework matters, and those framework matters are always going to be matters of deciding whether this is appropriately understood as a particularist concern, appropriately dealt with as a universalist matter, or something in between. And so when I get really angry and start fighting with people, whether it's because somebody thinks Trump's rightful election was stolen from him, or whether it's because somebody thinks some crazy nonsense about COVID or anything else, it's because they've allowed their position, their universal frame of reference and or statement they're affirming about reality to dictate to them the status of things. They can't be dictated by universal rules like that for various reasons. Or, in other words, they've misattributed the universal to a particularist concern, or vice versa. So, those are my thoughts, and I wanted to make a little video about it, and that's the video.